that warning for years about the dangers that the former president poses to democracy. Michael Cohen is a former personal attorney to Donald Trump. He's the principal of the crisis management firm CrisisX. He's the author of the New York Times best-selling books Revenge: How Donald Trump Weaponized the Department of Justice Against His Critics, and Disloyal, a memoir. He's also the host of the podcast Mea Culpa with Michael Cohen and The Political Beatdown. Michael, good to see you. Thank you for being here. I mean, the weird part about this story, and the reason you're on with me, is you've actually been saying this for a long time, that this is what he's going to do if given half the chance. And he's not hiding it. His people are not hiding it. The stuff that Kash Patel just said, while that was targeted at media, they're basically saying we're going after critics, we're going after enemies, we're going after the opposition, we're going after the media.
Yeah, Ali, don't listen to what Michael Cohen is saying. Don't listen to what Ali Velshi is saying or any of the pundits you see on television. Listen to what Donald is saying. That's the whole point. And yes, I had talked about this going back 3 years and 2 years. And then when my book Revenge came out, it's all laid out in there. Donald Trump does not want to be president of the United States. How many times have I said it, even on this show? He wants to be the dictator, the monarch, the Führer, the king. That's what he aspires to be. And when he says that he's going to be dictator on day one, I want to ask you this question. I want to ask your viewers this question. When was the last time somebody became a dictator for just one day and then decided to give it up? Yeah. The answer, of course, is never. Once Donald tasted that power, he craves it more and more. And everybody, when he says, for example, like the president and the CEO of this station, of MSNBC, he will jail him, or Joint Chief of Staff Mark Milley, he will execute him. Don't laugh and just say, come on, Donald's a dope, right? He's just being bluster. He's being Donald. He's being dead serious.
But Michael, that's exactly what people say. That's exactly what people say. And you know, because you talk to them. You're like, don't listen to that stuff. That's what he does. That's how he talks. You've known him for a long time. How do you delineate between the bluster when he says just dictator for a day? He talked last year about getting rid of the Constitution. I mean, how do you know what's a joke and what's not with Donald Trump?
First of all, Donald Trump doesn't joke. He does not have a sense of humor. In fact, ask anybody who knows him, say, have you ever heard Donald tell a joke? And the answer is no. Everything that he's saying is on his mind. He is so emboldened right now to say what he wants. He sees himself right now as the obvious Republican nominee. So at least it's a 50-50 election between him and Joe Biden. However, with all the polls now bolstering him and saying that he beats Joe Biden, his rhetoric is going to get more and more dangerous. It's going to get more and more anti-democratic. He's going to continue to say these things which just make you scratch your head and say, how are we as Americans even allowing somebody who says this sort of stuff to run for the office of the presidency? We are right now in a position where we will lose democracy in 2024. And I don't want to be right. Unfortunately, knowing Donald as well as I do and seeing the writing on the wall, I know that I am.
Let me ask you about this. What if it's not about control and dictatorship, but it's about the thing that you know very well with him, and it's about loyalty? Because what a lot of his people around him are saying is it's about loyalty and fealty. Donald Trump's not going to pick his cabinet based on their skill set and their experience. He's going to pick his cabinet or his advisors based on how loyal they are to him. Parse that for me. Is that less or more important? Is it less real or more real? Is it less or more threatening?
It is more threatening than most people could possibly imagine. You will have an entire transition team of loyalists. He will also have members of the military sign a loyalty oath to who? To him. When was, again, let me go back to what I just said before. When was the last time that we had a president or any significant leader in this country ask another person to take a loyalty oath, not to the Constitution, not to American democracy, but to that individual? I mean, that is an autocratic mindset. That is what a king does. I mean, just think about all the movies that you've seen about, kings. It's like, I pledge to the king. All hail the king. That's what Donald wants. He wants to be like a Mohammed bin Salman. He wants to be like Kim Jong-un or like Vladimir Putin. And, the thing that most people are ignoring, and this applies to everyone, when Donald has full authority and full power, you can't imagine the things that he's going to do, how far he's going to press the line. If you think Vladimir Putin, Russia entering Ukraine is, for a land grab, well, what do you think Donald is going to do if he becomes a dictator? Mexico, Canada, whatever our bordering countries are. So, Ali, when you said that you're running to Canada, half my family lives in Toronto. I can only tell you, we can't go to Canada because eventually Canada will become annexed to America. And I know people say, stop it, Michael. It's all hyperbole. No, it's not. Donald sees himself not as a human. He sees himself as like a god. He believes himself to be above all of us and that he wants to, be the king. He wants to take over the world.
Do you believe he really believes that, or do you believe he's able to convince people of it so he's riding that wave?
No, I think he actually now has convinced himself. That's the classic definition of a sociopath. That is what Donald has become. He, with the people around him, constantly providing him with accolades and pats on the back. You're right, Donald, you're right. All of a sudden, it's like, I'm going to be a dictator on day one. I mean, come on, that's who's the last dictator that the United States ended up fighting? We all know, right? We all know it was World War II. Donald Trump will put this country into a third world war. And the problem for, people like myself is I have a son and a daughter who are of fighting age. And I don't want to see my children off to war. I don't want to see anybody's children off to war. But Donald will do it. Why? Because it is part of that loyalty oath. It is the fealty to the king. Send them out. Whatever happens to them, I don't care, as long as I get what I want. That's all that Trump is about, getting what he wants.
Michael, as always, I appreciate your analysis. You know
be
what
afraid,
to speak.
Ali, as I say to everybody.
You've been telling me for a long time.
Be afraid.
You've been telling us for a long time.
Afraid.
Now he's actually telling us. His people are actually telling us all this stuff that you've been talking about is real. Michael, thanks very much. Michael Cohen, former personal attorney to Donald Trump, author of the books Revenge and Disloyal, host of the Mea Culpa podcast with Michael Cohen and Political Beatdown.